Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding a Mishnah Berurah Chel Gimel and Emir Hashem. Today we will be learning Daf Chaf Daled Amud Beis and completing the very, very complex Siman Reish Dun Gimel. I was speaking to a Talmud Chacham, of note the other day, and he asked me what I'm holding in, what am I in middle of learning. So I told him I'm saying Shir and Hilchos Shabbos Reish Dun Gimel. I told him I'm saying a Dirshu share. So he asked me, he said, Dirshu Mishnah Berurah. So what is that, a page a day? So I said, yes. So he said, and you're holding in Reish Dun Gimel? I said, yes. He says, well, I'm sure in Reish Dun Gimel they're not doing a page a day. So I smiled and I said, what do you think they are doing? He said, well, in Reish Dun Gimel, I mean, you're not going to do more than a half a page a day. He asked me, how long is your share? I said, I try to keep it at the maximum 45 minutes. So he said, well, there's no way you're doing a whole Amud of Mishnah Berurah and Siman Reish Dun Gimel in 45 minutes. I told him, I said, that's the schedule. I have to keep to the schedule. So yeah, I am doing an Amud in 45 minutes. He looked at me in shock. He said, who made this schedule? It shouldn't be that way. I said, well, that's the way it is. So we pick up today on Chav Daled Amud Aleph in the bottom line of the Shulchan Aruch, in the middle of the words of the Ramah. We're up to the bottom line, Aval im hakederois adayin chamin. So our learning should be a schus for Acheduk Beis Yisrael, Hanusuna Batzaru Bashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Ubein Bayabasha, Hamalke Merachem Aleihem, V'yotziyeh Mitzara L'Rvacha Me'afela L'Oiro Mishubad L'Geula, Hashta Bagala V'zman Kariv and Emar Amein. Our learning should be a schus for Shalema, for David ben Blima. He should have a Refuah Shalema B'Seich Shar Chayle Yisrael. When I'm recording this, I'm a little bit ahead of the Olam. There's a great fear in Eretz Yisrael due to recent events that there may be chas v'chalila an imminent attack. So it is incumbent upon all of us to be mechazik in tefillah. We have to use our klei umnus, and we have to send up our tefillas to the Rebbeinu Shalom. But not only do we have to send up our tefillas to the Rebbeinu Shalom, we have to remember on a daily basis, whenever we discuss what's going on in Eretz Yisrael, whenever we think about what's going on in Eretz Yisrael, we have to remember that all of the big talkers and all of the politicians and all of the people who think that they're in a position of power, none of them are in a position of power. None of them. When we say in davening, L'cha Hashem hagedula v'hagevura v'hateferes v'hanetzach v'hahoid, what does that mean? I heard from Friedrich Klausenberger Rebbe many years ago in the Chumash Rashi shir. He said, L'cha Hashem hagedula v'hagevura. What does that mean? We're ascribing gedula to the Rebbeinu Shalom. What does it mean? What our concepts of gedula, our concepts of gevura, we're ascribing gevura to the Rebbeinu Shalom. We don't even know what gevura is in the context of the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom is not a weightlifter, that he's strong. What does it mean? L'cha Hashem hagdula v'hagevura. So one of the pshatim is that whenever we see gedula, whenever we see gevura, as you see a mighty multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier be dispatched to the Middle East, brewing with weaponry and brewing with planes and modern technology and everything else, you have to realize that's not gevura. Looks like gevura. No. L'cha Hashem hagedula v'hagevura. The Rebbeinu Shalom has gedula. The Rebbeinu Shalom has gevura. This is not gedula. This is not gevura. This is nothing. It's all nothing. All these people, they think that they're doing things. They think that they're making decisions. They think that they're pulling the strings. They think that they're directing events. They're not. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the one that's directing events. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the one that's making the decisions. The Rebbeinu Shalom is the one that's pulling the strings. And we have a direct audience. You can't pick up the phone. I had this. Somebody in Home Depot came over to me and said, it's terrible what's going on in Gaza. I said, yeah, it's terrible. He said, so why don't you stop it already? So I told him, I said, yeah, it's funny. I took out my phone and I said, I've been trying to call Bibi all day. He's ghosting me. He's not taking my phone calls. I don't know why. So the guy looks at me funny. And I said, yeah, just because I have this on my head, it doesn't mean that I have a direct line to Bibi Netanyahu and I can tell him, it's terrible what's going on in Gaza. Why don't you stop it already? But we do have a direct line to the Rebbeinu Shalom. That we have. We have a schus. We can speak to the Rebbeinu Shalom 3 times a day. We have to take advantage of it. And we need to be mispal. Nachzar le'inyonenu. So, before we go weiter here in the Shulchan Aruch, I want to take a step back and go to a halacha that we learned at the end of yesterday's year. So we had a Ramah. The Ramah told us, Hayois, we learned over here in middle of Siman Hay, and we've been learning in this whole Siman the difficulties of Chazara. Once you take a pot off the fire, so you took the cholent off the fire Shabbos morning, and now somebody might want cholent later in the afternoon, you get into a shaila of Chazara. And we see all of the complexities of Chazara. You're not always allowed to take that pot and put it back in the fire. We've seen 5 Tanoim. We see different situations. It's not so easy. Chazara becomes a shaila. So the Ramah said, Hayois Chazara is a complex sugya, and Chazara could very often be aser. Said the Ramah here on Chavdal Amud Aleph, the second line from the top, Lochein Noyhagin. Therefore, the minig became that what was done, the Eino Yehudi would take the cholent. So the cholent was inside some kind of a tanur. You did shehiyah before Shabbos in an oifen heter. You took the cholent and you put it in and you kept it hot there on Shabbos. Now for the Shabbos Suda, they took the cholent out, and then the Eino Yehudi would take the cholent after the cholent cooled off. The cholent is already cold. He would take the cholent after the cholent already cooled off. So now it's totally impossible for a yid to do chazara. One of the ikar tenoim, one of the conditions for chazara to be mutter is the food has to be oider asachas. It still has to be hot. This cholent is cold. The Eino Yehudi would take the cold cholent and he would put it on top of the tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif. What's the tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif? The Beis HaChoyrif was a room that had a wood-burning stove that was used for heat. This was not a cooking stove. This was a wood-burning stove. It's a firebox with a steel top. It doesn't have place to put pots. I mean, it has room, but that's not what it's used for. You don't cook on top of that. But the Eino Yehudi would take the cold cholent, and he would put it on top of the tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif when there was no fire in the tanur. So this was a cold furnace in the Beis HaChoyrif. He would take the cold cholent and he would put it down on top of the tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif. Then later on, you would ask the Shivcha Eino Yehudis, go make a fire in the furnace of the Beis HaChoyrif. Why? Because the room is cold. And she would go and make a fire in the tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif. Now, when she makes a fire in the tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif, you know what's going to happen? The room is going to get warm, and the cholent is going to get hot. So this is a way that you could reheat the cholent for shalosh udis. The cholent was taken off the kira, it was put down, it was cooled off, it's cold. You want to have hot cholent later, so the first Eino Yehudi would just take the cold cholent and put it on top of the cold tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif that has no fire in it, and then later on the Shivcha would come and build a fire in the tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif, and by doing so, she would heat the room, but she would also heat up the cholent, and the Ramah said that that's mutter. And we saw this in the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah analyzed it. The Mishnah Berurah broke it down, and he said there's really no problem over here. Now, the Mishnah Berurah is taking the position that it's mutter to tell the first Eino Yehudi to take the cold cholent and put it on top of the cold tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif. So let's break this down. So you're telling the first Eino Yehudi, oh, do me a favor, take the cold cholent and put it over there on top of the wood-burning stove in the Beis HaChoyrif. No problem. There's no fire in there. The Eino Yehudi is not doing anything. He's not doing any kind of bishul. He's not doing any kind of chazara. He's not reheating anything. He's putting a cold pot on top of a cold oven. So Mishnah Berurah said, no problem telling him to do that. Okay, next step. You go to the Shivcha Eino Yehudis, and you ask the Shivcha Eino Yehudis, go make a fire in the tanur of the Beis HaChoyrif. Now let's break that down. There's no Amir La'akum problem on asking her to make the fire. Usually, that would be Amir La'akum 101. You're asking an Eino Yehudi to make a fire for you on Shabbos. You're asking her to do a Malacha Daraisa for you on Shabbos. But that's not a problem, because remember, Amir La'akum is a Darabanan, and Hakol Chayli Eitzel Tzina. Everybody is considered an ill individual when it comes to the risk of being cold. So Memela, you're allowed to do Amir La'akum to make a fire to take away the cold. We're talking about in the winter when it's 20 degrees. So you could do Amir La'akum to ask the Shivcha Eino Yehudis to make the fire. And that's why she's making the fire. She's not making the fire to make the cholent hot. Now, it is a psik reisha that once she makes the fire to make the room warm, she's also going to reheat the cholent that's sitting on top. But the Mishnah Berurah said, Amira la'akum, to ask an Eini Yehudis to make a fire that's mutter because of cold, and it happens to be a psik reisha that when she makes that fire, she's also going to reheat the cholent. Said the Mishnah Berurah, Amira la'akum, which is a derabanan, and it's a derabanan she'ein by maisa. You're not doing anything. You're just asking her to make a fire, right? We're not makpid on psik reisha, that even though she's doing it to warm up the room, there's a psik reisha that it's going to make the cholent cold. So the Mishnah Berurah said, that's why this is mutter. You're allowed to instruct the first Eini Yehudi to put the cholent on the cold furnace because he's not doing anything. It's a cold furnace without any fire in it. You're allowed to do Amir La'akum to the Shivcha to build the fire because she's building the fire to warm up the room. And she's allowed to build a fire to warm up the room for you because Akol Chayli Eitzel Tzina. Grada, the cholent is going to get hot. Okay, guess what? You got an added bonus. You're going to have hot cholent for Shalosh Udas. That's the halacha that we learned yesterday. Then the Mishnah Berurah came along, and the Mishnah Berurah said a very interesting thing. The Mishnah Berurah said, how about if instead of asking the first Eini Yehudi to put the cold cholent on top of the furnace, how about if you, the Yisrael, wants to put the cholent on top of the cold furnace? Well, let's think about this. You're taking a cold pot of cholent, and you're putting it on top of a cold furnace. What are you doing? But you're doing it, why? Because you know that in a half an hour, you're going to ask the Shivcha Eini Yehudis to make a fire. And when she makes that fire, it's going to warm up the cholent. Said the Mishnah Berurah, that's usher. It's usher with the Rabbanon. It's potter aval usher, but that's usher. Why is that usher? Well, it would seem that the reason it's usher is because this is much too close for comfort to Bishul. We know that there's halacha. Let's say if we weren't dealing with a Yisrael and a Shivcha Eini Yehudis. Let's say we were dealing with two Yisraelim. Now, one of them, unfortunately, is an Avarian. So you're going to put the pot on top of the cold furnace, and then the Yid is going to come chas v'chalila and make a fire inside the furnace. The second one is being over Yisur Daraisa, but you're being over in Yisur Darabanan. You're facilitating the cooking of the pot. You're putting it down on the cold furnace so that it should get cooked. You're facilitating the cooking of that pot, too close for comfort to Bishul, that's usher. Says the Mishnah Berurah the same thing over here. You're taking it and you're putting it down on top of the cold tanner of the Beis HaCherif with the full intent that later on you're going to ask the Shivcha to build a fire and the cholent is going to get hot. Too close for comfort, that's also b'drabanan. So the Mishnah Berurah says, the Ramah is telling you that you could do this through the agency of two Eini Yehudim. You could ask one Eini Yehudi to put the cold cholent on top of the cold furnace. You could then ask an Eini Yehudis to go ahead and build a fire inside the oven and agav, warm up the cholent. The real reason she's doing it is to warm up the house, but agav, the cholent is going to get hot. But for you to put the cold cholent on top of the cold furnace yourself, without the agency of an Eini Yehudi, that the Mishnah Berurah said you're not allowed to do. That's what we learned yesterday. But now, it brings up a very interesting question. First of all, you should know that this is a matter of dispute. The Mishnah Berurah, and I believe the Shulchan Aruch Harav, are taking the position that you're allowed to ask the first Eini Yehudi. You're allowed to instruct him to put the cold cholent on top of the cold furnace. Not everybody agrees with that. Even the Shulchan Aruch Harav says you should be machmir unless there's a big tzorich. But not everybody agrees with this. The Aruch HaShulchan does not agree with this. The Aruch HaShulchan says, where do you see that you're allowed to instruct the first Eini Yehudi to do this? If you look at the Lashon of the Ramah says, L'chein noihagin, therefore the minig became, Sheha'enam Yehudim moitzian akderos ben tanurim, that the Eini Yehudim take the hot pots out of the tanur, shemat minim behen, u'meishiven oisan eitzel tanur beis HaCherif ayolav, and they put it down on top of the cold furnace of the Beis HaCherif. Where does it say that you instructed the Eini Yehudi to do this on Shabbos? Maybe you told him, I don't know, some other time. In general, this is what I like to do with the pots. Who said that you actually instructed the Eini Yehudi to do this on Shabbos? The Aruch HaShulchan takes the position that it would be osur to actually instruct the Eini Yehudi to do this on Shabbos. But the Mishnah Berurah does not take that position. The Mishnah Berurah seems to be saying that it's mutter to instruct the Eini Yehudi to do this. Now, that brings up an interesting question. we learned, when we were learning the halachas of Emir La'akum, we learned that whatever is usher for you to do, you're not allowed to ask an Eina Yehudi to do, even by a D'Rabbanan. So if it's usher b'D'Rabbanan for you to put that cold pot of cholent on top of the cold furnace, like the Mishnah Berurah is saying, why is it mutter for you to ask the Eina Yehudi to do it? Very interesting question. It seems to be puzzling. I'm not 100% sure if I'm right, but I believe that the answer is as follows. I believe the answer is that if two people, like the case that the Mishnah Berurah brought down, right? Echad, his case was, Echad noisen hakidera ve'echad ha'esh. If one person, one Yisrael, puts down a cold pot on a furnace, and then another one comes, chas chalila, and makes a fire, so the first one is poter aval aser. The reason it's poter aval aser is because by you putting the pot onto the kedera, in order so that the kedera should get cooked up, and then another person coming and making a fire in order so that the pot should get cooked up, by that, you are part and parcel of the havara, of the building of the fire and the bishul of the pot, which is Meleches Isser on Shabbos. You just came up with a cute chap. You're dividing up the bishul. You're putting the pot down and somebody else is making the fire. But you want to cook up the pot and he's making a fire to cook up the pot. So fine. This is kind of like a Shtaim Shasua almost. You divvied up the malacha of bishul in an attempt to say that you shouldn't be doing anything aser. But it's pater aval aser, it's aser b'd'Rabbanan. Because this is wink wink, we know what you're doing. You're trying to get this pot cooked up and you're being part of Meleches Isser. You're being part of something that's being done be'Isser. But when you ask an Eina Yehudi to put the pot down, you're asking an Eina Yehudi to put the pot down so that what should happen? So that later when the shivcha comes and does a ma'aseh heter, the shivcha is not coming to cook up the pot. The shivcha is coming to heat up the house. That's why she's firing up the furnace, the tanner of the Beis HaChayrev. She's not doing it to cook up the pot. So now you're not uncomfortably close to a ma'aseh bishul. Nobody's doing bishul here. The Eina Yehudi is just putting the pot away. He's putting the pot on top of a cold tanner. The shivcha is going and warming up the house, which he's allowed to do. So you're not uncomfortably close over here to a davar aser, and I believe that's why the Mishnah Berurah says that over here the Amir La'akum would be mutter. Okay, now that we've covered that, I wanted to make sure that we had clarity on that last piece that we learned in the previous year. Now we pick up on Chavdal and Amud Aleph, the bottom line in the Ramah, Avalim Hakiderois Adayin Chamin. Until now, we were speaking about a pot that was taken off, put down, and it's cold. And that's when the Ramah came with this chap that you could use the two Einam Yehudim. But now, says the Ramah, Avalim Hakiderois Adayin Chamin. Let's say you took the cholent out of the tanur that it was in, and you took it out, you put it down, and it's still hot. It's not cold. Then, says the Ramah, muter laha'amidon eitzel tanur beis hachayrif. Now, you could actually go and you could put it down next to the tanur of the beis hachayrif. Not on top of the tanur of the beis hachayrif, not inside of the tanur beis hachayrif. But the Ramah says you could put it down next to the tanur of the Beis HaChayrev. Why? Why are you allowed to do this? Says the Ramah, Me'achar shenispared the tanurim shalom yesh lehem din kira. Let's remember something that we've been saying all along in Reish Nun Gimel. Our tanurim, at least the tanurim that they had, have a din of a kira. Remember, we said a kira is not very hot. The kira is big, it has room for two pots on top, it's built straight, it doesn't retain a tremendous amount of heat. A tanur, we said, that retains a tremendous amount of heat. It only had room for one pot on top, so it was smaller, and it was built like a pyramid. It was angled in at the sides, the heat rises, it gets trapped at the top. Tanur is extreme heat. But that was the Tanur back in the day. The Mishnah, the Gemara, maybe the Mechaber. But the Ramah says over here, remember, our Tanurim are not really considered Tanurim. Our Tanurim really have a din of Akira. So says the Ramah like this, I'm telling you, if the pot of cholent is still hot, you could do Chazara, not Chazara on top of the Tanur Beis HaChorev, not Chazara inside the Tanur of the Beis HaChorev, but you could take the pot and you could put it down next to the Tanur Beis HaChorev. Why? Since our Tanurim have a din of Akira, Usmicha b'kira she'ena grufa uketuma, kedin grufa uketuma le'inyan nisina aleha. What does that mean? Well, we know that you're allowed to do chazara on top of a kira if the kira is garafakatum. Now, you also need the other tanoim. You need mavushal kol tzarchai, which you have. You need adayin reisachas, it should still be hot, which you also have. Now, we'll discuss oida b'yadai, Daiter Lachzira, we'll discuss that in a minute. But in the meantime, he says, look, our Tanurim are like Akira. Now, Akira, you're allowed to do Chazara on top of Akira if it's Gara Fekatum. We're dealing with a Tanur, and we're dealing with not putting it on top of the Tanur. Our Tanur has a din of Akira, but we don't want to put it back on top of the Akira, on top of the Tanur that has the same din as Akira. We want to put it down next to it. Okay. What's the halacha of chazara bismicha? Are you allowed to do chazara by putting a pot next to a kira, even if it's not garafikatum? Says the Ramah, yes. Usmicha b'kira she'ena grufa uketuma. To do smicha, to do chazara, by putting the pot that we took off, by putting it next to the kira, even if the kira is not grufa uktuma, kedin grufa uktuma le'inyan nesina aleh, is the same halacha as if you have a kira that is grufa uktuma and you want to put it back on top. In other words, what the Ramah is saying is like this. It's a little confusing the way he worded it, but what the Ramah is saying is like this. The same way it's mutter to do chazara on top of a kira that's grufa uketuma, you're also allowed to do chazara next to a kira, even if it's not grufa uketuma. So, okay, what are you trying to do here? You have the Tanur of the Beis HaChorev. The Tanur of the Beis HaChorev has a fire going inside. It's not grufa uketuma. But what I'm telling you is, the Ramah says, I'm not telling you to do chazara on top of the Tanur Beis HaChorev. I'm telling you to do chazara next to the Tanur of the Beis HaChorev. Okay, the Tanur of the Beis HaChorev has a din of Akira. Okay, so in that sense, we have over here a Kira that's Eina Grufa Uktuma. So you're allowed to do Chazara next to a Kira that's not Grufa Uktuma, and that's what I'm telling you. That's what I'm telling you to do. Okay, now says the Ramah, what we didn't address is how about the fact? Again, let's remember we're dealing with a cholent, let's say that's mavushal called tzarchai. We're dealing with oida reisachas. It's still hot. That's what the Ramah started this halacha with. Aval lemakteres adayin chamin. We're talking about a pot that's still hot. So we have a pot that's still hot. We have mavushal called tzarchai. We're saying that you don't need grufa uktuma because we're not putting it on top of the tanur, aka kira. We're putting it next to the tanur, which has the din of a kira. So you don't need grufa uktuma. But how about daitoi lahachzira? That when you took it off, you had in mind to put it back. And how about oida b'yadai, that you still have it in your hand? Do you need those tanoim? Says the Ramah, no. According to me, you don't. Because says the Ramah, ukvar nisbar, and we already explained earlier in Siv Beis in the Ramah, shenagu lahakel b'chazara b'Shabbos afilu hinicha al gabe karka. Remember, the Ramah paskin like the Ran. The Ran holds that the restrictions of chazara, the halacha that you need daita lahachzira and oida biyadai for chazara, that only applies when you took a pot off before Shabbos and you're doing the chazara on Shabbos. Over there, we need daita lachzira, we need oida b'yadai, so it should be very clear that what you're doing is a ma'isa chazara and not a ma'isa of hanacha lechatchila. You're not doing initial placement. Since the pot wasn't on the fire on Shabbos, and now you're going to put it on the fire on Shabbos, it looks uncomfortably like hanacha lechatchila. How do we make it clear that it's chazara, which Chazal sometimes were matir? By saying that you have to still be holding it, you had to have daita lachzira, but if the pot was on the fire on Shabbos, and you took it off on Shabbos, and you want to put it back on Shabbos, then everybody understands that what you're doing is chazara. In that case, you still need gar fekatim, because without gar fekatim, you have shem yachata b'gecholim. We're afraid you might stoke the coals to fire up to the fire and make the pot reheat faster. So you still need grufa uktuma, but daita lahachzira and oida b'yada you don't need. So says the Rama over here, kvar nizbar shenagu lahakal b'chazara b'Shabbos afilu hinichal gabe karka. I already told you that as far as oida b'yada, the words he's using is that you hinichal gabe karka, if you put it down on the karka already, that we don't need over here. Even if you put it down on the ground, says the Rama, you could put it down next to the tanner of the Beis HaChoyref, because I paskin like the Ran. I paskin like the Ran, and I hold you don't need oida b'yadai, and you don't need daita lachzira if the pot was on the fire on Shabbos and you're putting it back on Shabbos. So therefore, comes out the Ramah says, you took the cholent out of the tanner where it was to be warm for the Shabbos Suda, you took it out, you didn't have daita lachzira, and you put it down on the ground, so it's not oida b'yadai, but now you want to take it after it, you want to take it while it's still warm, and you want to put it next to the Tanner Beis HaChoyref, that you're allowed to do. It's still warm, so there's no shaila of bishul. Even if it's a davar lach, there's no shaila of bishul, because it's not in legamri. It didn't completely cool off. So there's no shaila of bishul. And as far as the gzeira against chazara, you don't have a problem, because this is chazara like on top of Akira, like next to Akira. And chazara next to Akira, you don't need grufa uktuma. So you don't need grufa uktuma to put it down next to the Tanner Beis HaChoyref. And oida b'yada and daita lachzira, you don't need, because I paskin like the Ran. That's what this Ramah is saying. So I'll just read again from the second line. Ukvar nizbar. I already told you that I paskin like the Ran. Shenagu lahakal b'chazara b'Shabbos, that we could be makel by chazara on Shabbos if the food was taken off the fire on Shabbos. Afilu inichal gabe karka, even if you put the pot down, so it's not oida b'yada anymore. V'hu adin lismaich l'taner she'ena gar fekatim. So to put it down next to do smicha next to one of our tanurim that have a din of Akira, it's fine. You don't need grufa uktuma. Hayil v'aktera dain cham, since the pot is still hot. Mevushal kol tzarchai, and it's mevushal kol tzarchai, so there's no shaila of bishul here. It's okay. V'chein aminik pashat lahater, v'ayin l'kamon, sibin shin yud ches. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. The first Mishnah Berurah over here is back on Chavdal and Amud Aleph, Eis Katan Kuf Beis. Mutter lahamidan. Yeah. If the food is still hot, mutter lahamidan, afilu Yisrael, va'afilu laka shehusak. A yid could do this. A yid could take the hot cholent that was taken out of the tanner, he could take it and do chazara by putting it next to the tanner of the Beis HaChoyref, even if there's already a fire in the tanner Beis HaChoyref. Not like the case we had before with the two Einam Yehudim, where the guy puts it on top of the tanner Beis HaChoyref when there's no fire in the tanner Beis HaChoyref. No, over here there is a fire in the tanner Beis HaChoyref. And a yid could take the hot pot of cholent, or the still warm, not hot, the still warm pot of cholent, he could take it and he could put it down on the ground next to the Tanner Beis HaChoyref. Even if there's a fire already in the Tanner Beis HaChoyref. Eis Katan Kuf Gimel, Eitzel Tanner Beis HaChoyref. You could put it down next to the Tanner Beis HaChoyref. But Aval Olav, but for a yid to put it on top of the Tanner Beis HaChoyref, v'choshked b'soichai, or to put it inside the Tanner Beis HaChoyref, aser, that would be 100% aser. Keviche in a gar fekatum. You still need grufa uktuma. You can't, to put it on the Tanner Beis HaChoyref, or in the Tanner Beis HaChoyref, which is even more comer. You wouldn't be allowed to do that, because it's not gar fekatum. If it's not gar fekatum, and you put it on top, or you put it inside, we have to worry about shem yachata b'gecholim. But not if you put it down next to. If you put it down next to, we're not worried. even for Yisrael to put it on top of the Tanur Beis HaChayrif or inside the Tanur Beis HaChayrif, even if we're dealing with the pot still being hot, that would also be aser. Mishum chashash shemi yichata achakach begechalim lahar beis chuma she'akter shalamala yir nusachim, because now we have to worry about shemi yichata begechalim. Because especially if there was no fire in the Tanur Beis HaChayrif, and you put it in when it's cold, and then let's say somebody comes and makes a fire in it, now we're definitely going to be worried about Shemi Yechata B'Gecholim, because you want to reheat this pot. I have a question over here that I had when I prepared, and I remembered the answer, and now I'm trying to remember the answer. The Mishnah Berurah told us before that a Yid is not allowed to put the cold pot. Right. The Mishnah Berurah told us before that a Yid's not allowed to put the cold pot on top of the Tanur Beis HaChayrif, because that would be uncomfortably close to Bishul. So a Yid certainly was not allowed to do that. Now the Mishnah Berurah is telling us that a Yid is not even allowed to take the hot pot, where there's no shaila of Bishul. Even if it's a davar lach, there's no shaila of bishul, because this is not stam legamri. Still, a yid is not allowed to put it on top of the cold Tanur Beis HaChayrif. Why? Because then, when the Tanur gets fired up, we're going to be worried. Shema yechata begechalim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, "V'ha'olam nagu heter litein alav kederes chamin koidem hesed." The Mishnah Berurah says, even though I just told you that the Yisrael is not allowed to put the hot pot or the still warm pot on top of the cold Tanur Beis HaChayrif that doesn't have fire in it, I just told you you're not allowed to do it, but the Welt is noig heter to do that. V'yesh lehem al mashi yismeichu, and says the Mishnah Berurah, they have what to rely on. U'kaboisha kasavnu le'el ba'ois pei aleph ayin sham. What the Mishnah Berurah is referring to is, we saw a Magen Avram earlier in Mishnah Berurah ois cut and pei aleph that said that when you have a Tanur, like the Tanur Beis HaChayrif, which is not meant for cooking at all. It's a firebox with a steel top, with no openings for pots. It's not meant for cooking. So the Magen Avram said that has a din always of grufa uktuma, and you're allowed to do chazara on top of it. The Maharil disagreed. The Maharil said you can't do it without putting a board or something on top of the Tanur, and then putting the pot on top of that for a hecker. But the Magen Avram said, this is bechlal not the derech bishul. It's closed up, it's got a steel roof, it's not meant for cooking, so the Magen Avram was matir. That's why the Mishnah Berurah is saying over here, he's saying that the Welt was noig heter, that at least if there's no fire in the Tanur Beis HaChayrif before the fire is built, you could go ahead and you could take the still hot cholent and put it down on top of it, and v'yesh la mamasha yismeichu, because of that Magen Avram. Aval acher hesik lo yinoy kein, but after the fire is built, not. Rak tzarich litein is a daf or eitz takas akter le'akera v'chanal b'shem Maharil. Mishnah Berurah is saying, yes, there are those that were matir based on the Magen Avram to allow you to take the still hot pot and put it on top of this Tanur. Because they're being soymech on that Magen Avram, at least when there's no fire inside the Tanur. But he says, if there's a fire in the Tanur, that we should be machmir like the Maharil, and you definitely would need some kind of a blech, you would need a board or something on top of the Tanur. Ois cotton kuf dalit. Our Tanurim have a din of Akira, and since our Tanurim have the din of Akira, and you're allowed to do Chazara B'smicha, you're allowed to do Chazara by putting a pot next to a kira, even if the kira is not grufa uktuma. So that's why he's saying you could take the hot pot and you could put it down next to the Tanur Beis HaChayrif, even if it has a fire in it and it's not grufa uktuma. Says the Mishnah Berurah Kuf Dal Kedin Grufa Ritzayna Loimar V'chi Heicha Dahasa Mutar Lahachzer Afilu B'Shabbos. The same way we say by a kira that's not grufa uketuma, you're allowed to do chazara by putting the hot pot next to the kira, even on Shabbos. Hakanami mutar lismach b'kira v'tarnu mishalanu af kishe'enoi garuf. And by the way, if you just want a chazer iber, that halacha, if you take a look back on Daf Chaf Amud Beis in Mishnah Berurah Ois Cotton Tes Vav, that's where the Mishnah Berurah discusses this halacha, and where he says, and in the Bir halacha over there, Dibra Maskal Mutter Lismeichla, where he comes out la halacha that you're allowed to do chazara b'smicha by Akira, even if it's not Grufa Uktuma. Okay. Ois Cotton Kufe. So the Ramah said, Kvar Nispar Shenogu Lahakal B'Chazor B'Shabbos Afilu Hinichal Gabe Karka. What's the Ramah saying here? Says the Mishnah Berurah Inyan B'Ftei Atzmai. Really what the Ramah is saying over here, even though it's a little bit, in a sense, it's a continuation, but really the last 3 lines of the Ramah here, starting with the words of Kvar Nisbar, is really a standalone piece. The Ramah, the Mishnah Berurah explains. He says, "Huinyan b'fnei atzmo." You're tzorna loymar. What the Ramah wants to say is, "Ki heichi deli inyan chazara al gabe grufa." Just like when it comes to the halacha of doing chazara on Akira, that's grufa uktuma. Nisbar le'el. I explained earlier, says the Ramah, the mutar afilu hinichan al gabe karka b'koidim. We hold. I shouldn't say that. Reverse, rewind, take those words out. The Day Rishona that we learned in Sif Beis held that in order for Chazara to be mutter, one of the things that you need Grufo Ktuma, and you also need Daita Lachzira, that when you took the pot off, you had a mind to put it back, and you need Oida B'Yadai. You need that you're still holding the pot. You didn't let go of the pot. The Ramah turned around, and the Ramah said, I paskin like the Ran. I paskin that if you took a pot off on Shabbos and you're putting it back on Shabbos, you don't need Daitoi Lahakzira and you don't need Oida B'Yadai. You don't need that you were still holding it in your hand. Gruf Ktuma you need. But those other 2 Tanam you don't need. Because since the pot was on Shabbos and you're putting it back on Shabbos, it's clear that what you're doing is a Ma'aseh Chazara. It's clear that what you're doing is not Hanocha Lechatchila. So says the Ramah, the Mishnah Berurah is talking for the Ramah. What the Ramah wants to say is, the same way I told you earlier, that when it comes to doing Chazara on Akira, that's Grufa Uktuma. I said it's mutter even if you let go of the pot, even if you put it down on the ground, which is even more chomer than just letting go. Same way the Ramah is saying, that's why I'm telling you that it's mutter to do Chazara B'Smicha next to the Tanur of the Beis HaChorif, even though it's not Grufa Uktuma. And you don't need, it's okay that you let go of it. You don't need Oida B'Yadai. Who are din the little lachs of this Beis Tanur Sheina Garaf Hanal. I feel him Hamida Mikaydam Al Gabe Karka Gam Kin Mutter. Even if you put down the pot on the ground, it's okay to do Chazara B'Smicha, to take the hot cholent and put it down next to the Tanur Beis HaChorif. Even though you let go of it, even though you didn't have Daitoi Lachzira. Why? Because it was on the fire on Shabbos. It was in the Tanur on Shabbos. So now it's Chazara of something that was on the fire on Shabbos. So that you don't need Daitoi Lachzira and you don't need Oida B'Yadai. The code word that the Ramah uses for those 2 Tanoim, for Daitoi Lachzira and Oida B'Yadai, is Hiniach Gabi Karka. It's mutter to do this kind of chazara next to the Tanur Beis HaChorif that's not Garif Ekotum, even if you didn't have Daitoi Lachzira and you didn't have Oida B'Yadai. Okay, that brings us to the end of Siman Reish Nun Gimel. My hope is that I've done a good job of conveying the information and giving you all of the technicalities over here. I'm trying my best. By the way, I just also wanted to mention that we are going a little bit weiter. I just wanted to mention that B'derech Klal, I don't like saying shir to the rabbim if I'm not wearing either a jacket or a bekisha, and that's because of Kavod HaTzibur and Kavod HaTorah. However, those of you who are living in my locale, in the New York area, know that the heat has been incredibly oppressive, and I don't suffer heat well. And also, I think you know already that my style of saying Yeshir is a little bit high energy, so it kind of heats me up, and I can't be civil the heat, so the tzibur will be meichel me the Kavod HaTzibur. I hope the Torah HaKadosh will be meichel me the Kavod HaTorah. Okay. Siman Reish Nun Daled, we'll just get a taste of Siman Reish Nun Daled, we'll start it. Siman Reish Nun Daled, Dinei Tavshilin Hamuchadim et Mei Erev Shabbos, the halachas of cooked dishes that are prepared from Erev Shabbos, Kedei Lihi Gomer B'Shabbos, and the bishul, the cooking, will be completed on Shabbos, Ubay Tes Se'ifim, and here we have 9 Se'ifim. I will mention at the outset, well, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. The first Mishnah Berurah It's not ois cut and aleph. It's the aleph over here in the Mishnah Berurah. Afal pi. Ayin bebir halacha. The Chavetz Chaim says, take a look in the bir halacha dibra maskal afal pi. Sheivenu sugyas hagemara bekitzer, where I bring down the whole sugya of the Gemara in Shabbos bekitzer. If you look at this bir halacha dibra maskal afal pi, it's scary looking. It doesn't look so bekitzer, but it is bekitzer compared to the sugya in Masechta Shabbos. Levar divrei hamachaber v'harav be'elu ashtei seifim. I bring down the sugya, says the Chavetz Chaim, so that when you learn the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah, you should have the backing of the sugya and you understand better what it is that you're learning. Now, in this case, he chose to put the Hakdama in the Bir Halacha, not in the Mishnah Berurah. And I think the reason for it is, while it's true that certainly you need the backing of the sugya to really properly digest and understand what's going on here in the Siman, but it is possible to learn it on a kind of what I'm going to call a Dirshu level without getting deep into the sugya, but I would encourage people who have the time to take a look at this Bir Halacha. Now, says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Afal pi shebasar chai muter lahashoisai. If we go back to the beginning of Siman Reish Nun Gimel, we learned about the Issa D'Rabbanan of Shehiyah. High level, what's Shehiyah? So Erev Shabbos, you're taking a pot of food, you're putting it on the fire, so that it should stay on the fire into Shabbos, so you should have nice warm food for your Friday night Suda. That's called Shehiyah. You're maintaining a pot on the fire from before Shabbos going into Shabbos. And we've seen that there are restrictions on what you need to do that, when it's mutter to do that, and when it's also to do that. What's the problem that we're worried about? In general, the problem that we're worried about is if you maintain a pot on the fire going into Shabbos, there's this concern of Shema Yechata B'Gechalim. Maybe you're going to come home, you're going to be concerned, maybe it's not well done enough, maybe you want it a little bit hotter, you might stoke the coals. You stoke the coals, you're going to be over on Havara, you're going to be over also on Bishul, because you're accelerating the cooking process. So we saw that there are certain Tanoim that you need in order for this Shehiyah to be mutter. But one case that we saw where Shehiyah is mutter is with raw food. If you put up a cholent right before Shabbos, and you put it on the fire, you don't need garfikatum, you don't need anything. Why? Because there's no concern of Shebi Yechatam B'Gechalim. Why? Because you gave up on this food. You're not expecting to have this cholent for the Friday night Suda. You're not eating this cholent till tomorrow. And you don't need to be Mechatam B'Gechalim in order for the cholent to be ready tomorrow. It's going to be on the fire all night. It's going to be ready for tomorrow. So we learned that by basar chai, by raw meat, we're not concerned about Shehiyah, because there's no room for akshash shemi yechata b'gechalim. Having said that, says the Mechaber here in Reish Nun Daled, af al pi shebasar chai muter lahashoisai, even though we learned in Reish Nun Gimel that raw meat you're allowed to do Shehiyah. What does that mean? You're allowed to do Shehiyah, says the Mishnah Berurah cut and aleph, muter lahashoisai, you're allowed to do Shehiyah, hainu shemuter lite lechatchila lahashoisai al gabi kira v'tanur afilu me'enam grufa b'ktumim. You could leave this raw meat, the raw cholent, the cholent that has raw meat in it. You could leave it on the fire, even if it's not grufa ktuma. Really, you don't need a blech. The kevan chai, because since it's raw, you give up on it and you're not thinking about it until tomorrow. Now, we do use a blech. I'm just pointing out, remember, we do use a blech. Since it's cooking all night, you're not going to be mechata b'gechalim. It's going to be ready tomorrow without your chitoi. Like we learned at the beginning of Reish Nun Gimel. So says the Mechaber, even though I told you, raw meat, or a dish like cholent containing raw meat, there's no problem of shehiyah, because there's no chash of shem yechata b'gechalim. Hani mili b'kdera. That's true when it comes to a cooking pot of food, to a pot of cholent. Avol bitzli she'etz ala eish. But if you're roasting meat next to a fire, and we'll see what that means next to. Avol bitzli she'etz ala eish. If you're roasting meat next to a fire, aser lahanichai samach lechashecha, then you're not allowed to put the meat next to the burning coals right before Shabbos. Shememar lehispashel, because now you don't give up on the roasted meat. When you roast raw meat over an open fire, that could get ready quickly. Buy a pot of food, buy a cholent. If you put it up right before Shabbos, you're meyayish on it. You don't expect to have it for the Friday night Suda, so you're not going to be mechata b'gecholim. But when you roast meat over an open fire, that could get ready quickly, so you're not meyayish on it. You might expect to have it for the Friday night Suda, and then there is room for a gzera of Shemi Echata B'Gechalim. Shememar Lehispashel V'Asi Lechatuyeh. Says the Mishnah Berurah, is cut and base. Avol B'Tzli, when it comes to roasting meat, Afilu Imtzoiles Atzli B'Tanur, even roasting it in a pot. What does that mean, roasting it in a pot? You take a piece of meat, you put it in a pot without liquid, and you put the pot on the fire. That's called tzli. That's called roasting. That's not cooking. There's no liquid involved. V'atana mechusa, even if the pot is closed and the oven that it's in is closed, so you're not seeing it. Ach she'eno tuach petit, but it's not sealed. Chayshinon she'yegala hakisoy. We're worried, we're concerned that you might open the tanner, you might uncover the pot, v'yechata sham b'gecholim, and we have a chshash, shemi yechata b'gecholim, so this would be aser. Ois cotton gimel she'etzel eish. The Mechaber used very interesting wording. He didn't say you roasted it over a fire. He said you roasted it next to the fire. Says the Mishnah Berurah, la'afuke tzli kedar. Step back, because I misspoke slightly. Mishnah Berurah is cotton bays. Avol b'tzli. But it comes to roasting, afilu imtzoiles atzli b'tanor. Forget what I said about putting it in the pot. I mixed up two Mishnah Berurahs, Rabbi say. Over here in Mishnah Berurah's cut and bays, the Mishnah Berurah is saying like this. The Mechaber is saying that roasting next to the fire is a problem. Says the Mishnah Berurah, afilu imtzoiles atzli b'tanor. Even if you're roasting it not over an open fire, you know, the picture of the spit and the animal and the fire pit, and you're doing this over an open fire. No, you're roasting it the way we do roasting nowadays. You're putting it inside your oven, and you're roasting it inside your oven. Even if you roast it inside a tanur, the tanur mechusa, and the tanur is closed. Ach she'enu tuch petit, but it's not sealed. Still, chayshinon she'yegala akisoy, we're afraid you're going to open the oven v'yechata sham b'gecholim, and you're going to do chitoy. Now, the Mechaber used this funny lashon, tzli etzel ha'esh, roasting next to the fire. What does that mean, roasting next to the fire? Says the Mishnah Berurah, la'afuke tzli kedar. The Mechaber is telling you this iser. This that I'm telling you, that you're not allowed to start roasting meat next to a fire, even if it's raw. Usually we say raw, we're not worried about shehiyah, because you're miyayish on it. Not when you're roasting it. When you're roasting it, you're not miyayish, because that goes fast. But he says, when is that isser true? That's when you're doing it eitzel ha'esh, la'afuke tzli kedar. But roasting it in a pot, dinoi kibikdera umuter lahashoisoi. If you're roasting it in a pot, so you're putting it in a pot without liquid, and you're putting the pot over a fire, that is not called tzli. That's not osir because of this halacha reish nun dalet. That would be like reish nun gimel. That's mutter if the meat is raw. So it would be mutter to put a raw piece of meat inside a pot without liquid and put it over a fire right before Shabbos, because you are going to be miyayish from it. Another thing that the Mechaber is coming to la'afuke over here is if you would take the meat and you would lay it right on top of the coals. The sham afilu b'besar gedi osir, that would be osir even when it comes to very tender meat like a young goat or like poultry. Ukilakaman b'sif beis ayin sham hatam. Rabbi say, I'm going to explain the end of Mishnah Berurah Ice Cotton Gimel over here in the next chair, Mitzvah Hashem, because it's a little bit complex. It's getting ahead of ourselves, and we're already a little bit over time. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The discussion of limud HaTorah should be megan against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Hashem should send Yeshua's for Parnas and Shaduchim to all those in need, and we should be zeichet to see the Bias Goel Tzedek b'meher of Yameinu Amen. Be well.